Welcome to Billionaire Love Stories. The early morning sun painted the sky in shades of gold as a convoy of gleaming luxury vehicles pulled up to the international airport. The largest car in the procession came to a smooth stop, and out stepped Isabella Chan, a soft-spoken young woman with gentle eyes and an understated elegance that required no announcement. She just returned from the United States, where she'd spent her teenage years at an exclusive boarding school. Her billionaire father, Mr. Chun, had finally convinced her to come home, to be closer to family, and to finish her education at Riverside Academy, one of the most prestigious schools in the entire region. As the car doors swung open, Isabella emerged wearing simple jeans and a comfortable sweater, her long dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. A modest backpack hung from one shoulder. She couldn't help but notice the stares from passers-by, their eyes drawn to the impressive display of wealth on wheels. But Isabella had never cared for such attention. Despite growing up surrounded by luxury, she'd always preferred simplicity, authenticity, the quiet moments that money couldn't buy. Her father greeted her with open arms and a warm smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Welcome home, my dear Isabella. I know Riverside Academy will be perfect for you. Just focus on your studies, make genuine connections, and enjoy this chapter of your life." Isabella hugged him tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne. "I'll do my best, father. I promise." Though her father had offered her every comfort imaginable, a personal driver, a luxury car, designer clothes, Isabella had already made up her mind about how she wanted to live her final year of school. She would keep a low profile, blend in with her classmates, and for once just be a regular student. No spotlight, no assumptions based on her family name. That's why she decided to dress simply and ride a bicycle to school. Please subscribe and like this video and listen to my story till the end. Let me know which city you're listening from in the comments. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. Your support means the world to me. The next morning, the ornate iron gates of Riverside Academy swung open, welcoming students to the first day of the new term. Riverside was legendary, known throughout the city for its wealthy student body, its impossibly high academic standards, and the kind of networking opportunities that could shape entire futures. Expensive cars rolled through the gates one after another, dropping off young men and women dressed in designer labels and carrying bags worth more than some people's monthly rent. And then there was Isabella. She arrived quietly, parking her bicycle near the gate with a small click of the kickstand. She wore a neatly pressed white shirt, simple black pants, and carried a plain canvas bag over her shoulder. Her classmates barely glanced at her as she walked past. The few who did notice began whispering immediately. "Did she really just ride a bicycle to school?" one girl asked, her nose wrinkling in disbelief. "She must be a scholarship student," a boy replied with a soft laugh. "Poor thing probably can't afford anything better." Isabella heard the comments but kept walking, her head held high. She knew what people would think. Her father had always told her, "You don't need to prove your worth with expensive things, Isabella. Your character is your true value." Those words echoed in her mind as she made her way calmly toward her classroom. Not long after she'd settled in, the sound of an engine caught everyone's attention. A sleek black Range Rover with tinted windows pulled into the school compound. Heads turned. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. The driver stepped out quickly and opened the rear door with practiced precision. Out stepped Natasha Monroe. She was dressed in a custom-tailored crimson blazer that probably cost more than most students' entire wardrobes, carrying a designer handbag that glinted in the morning sunlight. Diamond studs sparkled at her ears, and her heels clicked against the pavement with each confident step. The students nearby began to murmur, their voices filled with awe and excitement. "That must be her," one boy said, his eyes wide. "The billionaire's daughter. I heard she just got back from studying abroad," a girl added, practically bouncing with excitement. "Her family supposedly donated an entire building to the school. Can you imagine?" Natasha smiled as the whispers reached her ears. She loved being the center of attention, thrived on it actually. She walked past the crowd with her chin lifted high, savoring every stare, every pointed finger, every breathless comment about her obvious wealth. As she passed, students practically fell over themselves to get a better look. "Wow, she's so sophisticated," someone breathed. "Of course she is," another replied knowingly. What do you expect from someone with that kind of money? That kind of breeding? Inside the classroom, Isabella quietly took a seat near the back. Her shirt was plain, her hair simply styled, and she carried herself with a humility that seemed almost foreign in this environment. She looked around, noting how other students avoided her area entirely, their eyes instead tracking Natasha, who had claimed a prime seat near the front. Natasha was immediately surrounded by a group of girls who fawned over every detail of her appearance. "Your bag is absolutely stunning," one of them exclaimed, reaching out to touch the leather. "Is it from the Paris collection?" Natasha's smile was radiant and just a bit smug. "Yes, my father picked it up for me during our last trip to France. He said I needed something elegant for school, something that reflected our family's standards." The girls gasped in unison, clearly impressed and probably a bit envious. Natasha leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs gracefully, thoroughly enjoying the attention. She loved hearing the rumors about her being the mysterious billionaire's daughter. She had absolutely no intention of correcting anyone's assumptions. Let them believe what they wanted. It served her purposes perfectly. Meanwhile, Isabella focused on organizing her notebook, trying her best to ignore the chatter swirling around her. But as the whispers grew louder, she couldn't help but overhear snippets of conversation. "She must be the daughter of the major donor everyone's been talking about," one boy said, glancing at Natasha with admiration. "Definitely," another agreed enthusiastically. "Just look at her. She's practically glowing with wealth." Isabella shook her head slightly, a small, knowing smile playing at the corners of her mouth. She wasn't bothered by the gossip, not really. She'd come to Riverside Academy to learn, to grow, to prepare for her future. Not to compete in some contest of who could appear wealthiest or most important. As the school day officially began, it became crystal clear that the students had already made up their minds about who was who. To them, Natasha was the glamorous heiress, the queen bee they all wanted to impress. And Isabella? She was just some simple, unremarkable girl who somehow didn't quite belong in their exclusive world. What would you do if everyone misjudged you based on appearances? Would you correct them immediately? Or would you wait and let the truth reveal itself? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. It didn't take long, maybe 3 days at most, for Natasha to set her sights directly on Isabella. To Natasha, Isabella's simple clothes and quiet demeanor made her an easy target, someone she could use to elevate her own status even further. By the end of the first week, Natasha had begun mocking Isabella openly, making sure everyone within earshot could hear. "Hey, bicycle girl," Natasha called across the hallway one morning, her voice loud and deliberately mocking. "Did your bike break down yet? Or do you need a scholarship fund for a new one?" A few students nearby laughed nervously, unsure whether to join in or look away. Isabella stopped walking for just a moment. She turned to face Natasha, her expression calm, her eyes steady and unflinching. "Good morning to you too, Natasha," she said softly, her voice carrying no hint of anger or embarrassment. Then she simply walked away. This only fueled Natasha's determination. During lunch that day, she gathered a group of girls around her table and began spreading rumors with the precision of someone planting seeds in fertile ground. "It's the only way someone like her could possibly afford this school," Natasha whispered conspiratorially, making sure her voice was just loud enough to carry to nearby tables. "She's obviously here on some kind of charity scholarship. Barely scraping by, I'm sure." The rumors spread like wildfire through dry grass. Soon, whispers of bicycle girl and scholarship student followed Isabella everywhere she went. In the hallways, in the cafeteria, even in the bathrooms. She ignored the taunts as best she could, focusing instead on her studies, on the reason she'd actually come to Riverside Academy. But not everyone was quick to judge. Marcus Thompson, one of the most popular boys in school, began noticing something the others seemed to miss entirely. Isabella's quiet strength, her dignity in the face of cruelty, the way she never fought back with the same pettiness that was directed at her. Marcus was everything the other students admired. Handsome, intelligent, athletic, and yes, from an extremely wealthy family. Despite his popularity, though, he wasn't arrogant. And he definitely didn't like watching Natasha treat Isabella so terribly. One day in the cafeteria, as Natasha's voice carried across the entire room, loudly mocking what she called Isabella's obvious poverty, Marcus decided he'd had enough. "Natasha," he said, his voice firm but controlled as he approached her table. "Do you ever stop talking about other people?" Natasha turned to him, genuinely surprised. Popular, sought-after Marcus Thompson was addressing her, but not in the way she'd hoped. "I'm just telling the truth, Marcus. She's clearly more focused on her education than on petty gossip," Marcus interrupted, his tone sharp now. "Unlike some people I could mention." The cafeteria fell into a stunned silence. Marcus walked over to Isabella's table and sat down across from her, offering her a kind, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Hi, Isabella. Do you mind if I join you?" Isabella looked up from her lunch, a bit surprised but pleasantly so. "Of course not. Please sit." Across the room, Natasha watched with barely contained fury. Her hands clenched into fists beneath the table, her perfectly manicured nails digging into her palms. How could Marcus, of all people, choose to sit with someone like Isabella? She'd tried multiple times, in increasingly obvious ways, to get his attention, and he'd barely noticed her existence. And now this. Over the following weeks, something unexpected happened. Marcus and Isabella developed a genuine friendship built on mutual respect, shared interests in literature and art, and long conversations about things that actually mattered. Things deeper than designer labels and family bank accounts. Natasha watched this growing friendship with increasing bitterness. Every smile Marcus gave Isabella felt like a personal insult. Every laugh they shared was like a knife twisting in her chest. When the school announced its annual charity gala, an event where students could showcase both their wealth and their supposed generosity, Natasha saw her perfect opportunity to shine, to prove once and for all that she was the real star of Riverside Academy. Each class had been tasked with raising funds, and individual donations would be announced publicly at the event. Natasha had been planning her moment for weeks. Have you ever felt like you had to prove yourself to people who didn't matter? Sometimes the loudest voices are hiding the deepest insecurities. Keep watching to see how this plays out. The night of the gala arrived, and the school's grand hall had been transformed into something from a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, elegant floral arrangements adorned every table, and students arrived dressed in their finest evening wear. When Natasha's turn came to announce her donation, she practically floated onto the stage, her designer gown shimmering under the lights. "I would like to donate $5 million to the school's charity fund," she announced, her voice ringing with pride and just a hint of superiority. The crowd erupted in applause. Students whispered to each other in amazement about Natasha's incredible generosity, about how wealthy her family must truly be. She returned to her seat with a triumphant smile, basking in the admiration like a cat in a sunbeam. Her closest friends, Vanessa Park and Jordan Mitchell, immediately showered her with compliments. "That was absolutely incredible, Natasha," Vanessa gushed, flipping her perfectly styled hair. "Nobody could possibly match your generosity. You're literally the star of the entire school now." "Absolutely," Jordan added, giving her an admiring look that lasted just a beat too long. Despite his sometimes conflicted feelings, Jordan couldn't help but be drawn to Natasha's apparent wealth and status. He'd been trying for months to get her to notice him as more than just a friend. Natasha soaked it all in, feeling invincible. But then later in the evening, when the next round of donations was announced, something happened that made the entire room fall into shocked silence. "Our next significant donation," the principal announced, adjusting his glasses as he read from his notes, "comes from Isabella Chan, who has generously contributed $5 million to our charity fund." The room went utterly silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the polished marble floor. Heads swiveled toward the back of the hall where Isabella sat quietly, her expression as calm and composed as ever. She hadn't moved, hadn't changed her posture, hadn't even acknowledged the announcement with so much as a smile. "Where did she get that kind of money?" Vanessa whispered urgently, her eyes wide with confusion and something that looked suspiciously like panic. Natasha's jaw tightened. Her hands gripped the edge of her chair so hard her knuckles turned white. She leaned over to Vanessa and Jordan, her voice dripping with venom. "Oh please," she hissed, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Do you really want to know how she got that money? She probably seduced Marcus. He's been spending so much time with her, hasn't he? It's obvious what's going on." Vanessa gasped dramatically, covering her mouth with her hand. "Oh my God, Natasha, you're probably right. That's so manipulative. So calculating." Jordan smirked, though something uncomfortable flickered in his eyes. "She's definitely not fooling anyone. Marcus must have paid for her donation. There's no other explanation." The gossip spread through the gala like poison through water. By the end of the evening, students were whispering that Isabella had somehow manipulated Marcus, that she'd used him to match Natasha's donation, that everything about her quiet demeanor was just an act to hide her true scheming nature. Natasha made sure to look especially smug whenever she overheard the rumors, relishing every cruel word, every judgmental whisper. This was exactly what she'd wanted. Isabella's reputation was crumbling, and Natasha had barely had to lift a finger. Despite the whispers following her like shadows, Isabella held her head high. She knew the truth. She knew her own heart and her own intentions. But she couldn't deny that the constant judgment, the endless rumors, the way people looked at her now, it was all beginning to weigh on her more than she wanted to admit. Marcus noticed immediately. He made a point of sitting with her even more often, defending her when he overheard particularly cruel comments, making sure she knew she had at least one true friend at Riverside Academy. But Natasha wasn't done. Not even close. With Vanessa and Jordan firmly by her side, she was determined to make absolutely certain that Isabella stayed in the shadows where Natasha believed she belonged. The following week, the school was buzzing with excitement about something new. Jordan had announced he was throwing a house party at his family's estate, and only the most elite and admired students were invited. Naturally, Natasha was at the very top of the guest list. "Will you be there, Natasha?" Jordan asked during lunch, leaning casually against her table, trying to appear nonchalant even though his hopeful expression gave him away completely. Natasha tilted her head, pretending to consider it carefully, drawing out the moment for maximum effect. "I might," she said with a playful smile. "I've actually been thinking about flying out to Dubai for the weekend. You know how stressful it is trying to balance school and international travel." She sighed dramatically, making absolutely certain everyone around them could hear. "But," she continued, as if she just had a brilliant idea, "maybe I'll use our family's private jet to fly back early. I wouldn't want to miss your party, Jordan. It just wouldn't be the same without me." Jordan's face lit up like she just promised him the world. "You're incredible, Natasha. Seriously. The party wouldn't be complete without you there." Vanessa chimed in immediately, her voice full of practiced admiration. "Natasha, you're too much. A private jet just to make it to a party? You're literally living a dream life. You're such a queen." Natasha soaked in the compliments, already imagining how her classmates would talk about her wealth and sophistication long after the party ended. In her mind, her position as the school's undisputed star was completely secure. But the very next morning, everything started to unravel. As students gathered near the school gates before classes began, Natasha's voice could be heard rising in anger, arguing loudly with someone just outside the entrance. Curious students glanced over, and what they saw made them freeze. Natasha was standing in front of a modestly dressed older woman, who was holding a basket of what appeared to be homemade food. The woman's clothes were worn but clean, her face lined with the kind of exhaustion that comes from years of hard work. "I told you not to come here," Natasha hissed, her eyes darting around nervously to see who might be watching. "What if someone sees you? What if they figure it out?" The woman, her face weary but filled with unmistakable maternal concern, pleaded softly. "Natasha, my darling, I just wanted to bring you some home-cooked food. You've been looking so thin lately, and I worry about you eating properly." Natasha snatched the basket and shoved it back toward the woman with more force than necessary. "I don't want it. And stop calling me that. Just leave, please, before someone notices and starts asking questions." The woman hesitated, her voice breaking slightly. "Natasha, I'm doing everything I possibly can for you. You know how hard it was for me to convince Mr. Chun to allow you to study here. Please, sweetheart, don't be ashamed of me. I'm still your mother." The students nearby began whispering urgently, confusion written all over their faces. Natasha's eyes darted around frantically. She could see Jordan and a few other classmates approaching from across the courtyard. Panic seized her. She stepped closer to the woman, lowering her voice but filling it with barely controlled fury. I told you to leave. You're embarrassing me. Just go. Now. When the woman didn't move quickly enough, still hoping to reason with her daughter, Natasha did something unthinkable. She pushed her. The woman stumbled backward, her worn shoes catching on the pavement, and she fell hard to the ground. The basket tumbled from her hands, its contents spilling across the sidewalk. Isabella, who had just arrived on her bicycle, witnessed the entire scene. Her heart ached for the woman, and anger surged through her at Natasha's cruelty. She immediately dropped her bicycle and rushed over to help. Are you all right, ma'am? Isabella asked gently, kneeling beside the woman and carefully helping her to her feet. She turned to face Natasha, her voice firm and filled with quiet fury. How could you treat an elderly woman like this? What kind of person pushes someone's mother? Natasha's mind raced as she saw Jordan and several other students getting closer, their expressions curious and concerned. In a moment of desperate self-preservation, she made a split-second decision. She pointed at the woman with a sneer. Don't act so righteous, Isabella. Isn't this your mother? Maybe you should keep better control of her instead of letting her embarrass herself at school gates. Isabella's jaw tightened. My mother would never be treated like this because I actually respect her, because I value her. What's your excuse? The crowd murmured in confusion, unsure of what they were witnessing, uncertain about who was telling the truth. Natasha took a step back, her expression carefully crafted into one of icy indifference. You can't fool anyone, Isabella. Stop pretending to be better than you actually are. Isabella ignored Natasha's desperate deflection and turned her full attention back to the woman, who was still brushing dust from her simple dress with trembling hands. Let me help you, ma'am, Isabella said softly, her voice gentle and genuinely concerned. She guided the woman to a nearby bench, making sure she was steady before helping her sit down. Thank you, my dear, the woman whispered, tears gathering in her eyes. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. I really didn't. Isabella smiled reassuringly, placing a comforting hand on the woman's shoulder. You didn't cause any trouble at all. Please don't think that. From a distance, Natasha watched the scene unfold with her stomach churning uncomfortably. Her mother's modest appearance, her worn clothing, her tired face, none of it matched the image of wealth and privilege Natasha had been so carefully cultivating. She couldn't let anyone discover the truth. She simply couldn't, no matter what it took. Later that day, Isabella overheard students still talking about the morning's confrontation, their versions of events growing more distorted with each retelling. Did you see Isabella actually yelling at her own mother this morning? One girl said, shaking her head in disapproval. Right at the school gates. How embarrassing. I know, right? Another added with a judgmental tone. She's always trying to act like she's better than everyone else, but clearly she can't even treat her own family with respect. The rumor stung more than Isabella wanted to admit, but she held her head high. She knew the truth even if others chose to believe lies. That would have to be enough for now. Meanwhile, Natasha, Vanessa, and Jordan sat together in the cafeteria during lunch, laughing as they continued to spread increasingly cruel gossip about Isabella. Can you even believe her? Natasha said with a harsh laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. Standing there pretending to be some kind of saint while treating her own mother like garbage. Jordan chuckled, though there was something uncomfortable in his expression. I'll say. She probably thinks standing up to you makes her look brave or something. Vanessa leaned in closer, her voice dripping with practiced sarcasm. It's honestly pathetic. She'll never truly fit in here. I don't know why she even tries. Natasha smirked with satisfaction, but deep down something gnawed at her. Emily's calm strength, her refusal to fight back with the same pettiness, her quiet dignity. Somehow it made Natasha look weak by comparison. And she absolutely hated that feeling. Have you ever watched someone spread lies about you and wondered if you should fight back, or just let the truth speak for itself? It's one of the hardest choices to make. Let me know what you'd do in the comments. As the days wore on, the bullying only intensified. Students whispered behind Isabella's back wherever she went. They made cutting comments about her clothes, her bicycle, her supposed poverty. Some called her names when they thought she couldn't hear, though of course she could. But Isabella refused to let them see her falter. She reminded herself constantly of her father's words. Your worth isn't determined by what others think of you, Isabella. It's determined by what you do, how you treat people, and who you choose to be when no one is watching. Despite everything, Isabella stayed focused on her studies, on her goals, on the bigger picture. She didn't know how much longer she could endure this level of cruelty, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would not let Natasha's lies and manipulation define who she was. The night of Jordan's party finally arrived, and the spacious hall of his family's mansion was transformed into something spectacular. Music pulsed through expensive sound systems, laughter echoed off marble walls, and Riverside Academy's elite students gathered in their finest clothes. Natasha stood at the center of it all, absolutely radiant in a glittering designer dress that probably cost more than a small car. Her friends Vanessa and Jordan flanked her like courtiers attending a queen, feeding her ego with constant compliments. "I have a special little surprise planned for tonight," Natasha said with a knowing smirk, her eyes drifting toward the entrance where Isabella had just arrived. Jordan, following Natasha's earlier request, had personally invited Isabella to the party, assuring her it would be a casual gathering of classmates. Isabella had decided to come, hoping it might be a chance to connect with her peers in a more relaxed setting. She arrived wearing a simple but elegant navy dress, her hair styled naturally, and she carried herself with her usual quiet confidence. The moment she stepped into the hall, conversation stopped mid-sentence. Students turned to stare, their expressions ranging from surprise to poorly concealed disdain. Natasha wasted absolutely no time. "Well, well, well," she said loudly, her voice cutting through the music and chatter like a blade. "Isabella, darling, did you stop by a thrift store on your way here? Or is that dress vintage?" She emphasized the last word with dripping sarcasm. Laughter erupted around the room. Some students joined in immediately, while others looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Isabella stopped walking. For a moment she simply stood there, feeling the weight of dozens of judgmental eyes on her. Her cheeks warmed slightly, but she took a deep, steadying breath and lifted her chin. "Thank you for noticing, Natasha," she said calmly, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet room. "It is vintage, actually. Not that I expect you to understand the difference between vintage and cheap." The calmness in her voice, the complete lack of embarrassment or anger, caught several students off guard. Whispers spread through the crowd as some began to admire Isabella's grace under such obvious pressure. Natasha's smirk faltered for just a fraction of a second, but she recovered quickly, her eyes glinting with malice. "Oh, I just absolutely adore how humble you are, Isabella," she said, her tone mocking. "In fact, let's make tonight more entertaining, shall we? How about a little friendly competition? Let's see if you have any actual talents to match that false confidence you're always displaying." The room grew even quieter. All eyes shifted between the two girls like spectators at a tennis match. Isabella looked at Natasha steadily, her expression calm but with an edge of steel beneath it. "What kind of competition?" Natasha shrugged elegantly, as if the whole thing was just a casual game. "Anything you want, really. But I'm quite sure we all know how this will end." Jordan, sensing the tension becoming genuinely uncomfortable, stepped forward. "Let's make it fair, Natasha. Isabella, do you sing or play any instruments? Maybe that could be your talent to showcase." Isabella hesitated for just a moment, then nodded slowly. "I can sing. A little." Natasha's eyes practically gleamed with predatory satisfaction. "Perfect. Let's give her the spotlight she so obviously craves." She gestured toward a small stage area where a microphone and piano waited, set up for entertainment during the party. Isabella walked to the stage with measured steps, her heart pounding but her expression composed. She could feel everyone watching, waiting, probably expecting her to fail spectacularly. She stepped up to the microphone, and the room fell into complete silence. Isabella closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her thoughts, steadying her breathing. When she opened them again, something had shifted in her demeanor. A quiet strength, a vulnerability she kept carefully hidden. Then she began to sing. Her voice started soft and clear, carrying a melody that was both haunting and beautiful. The song was about resilience, about finding strength in difficult times, about refusing to let the world break your spirit. As the song progressed, the audience seemed to collectively hold its breath. Even the students who had mocked her earlier found themselves captivated by the raw emotion in her voice, the way each note seemed to come from somewhere deep and genuine. When the final note faded into silence, there was a long suspended moment where no one moved. Then the room absolutely erupted in applause. Students who had barely acknowledged Isabella's existence were now clapping enthusiastically, some even whistling and cheering. The response was genuine, undeniable, and completely impossible to ignore. Natasha's face darkened. She forced a smile, but her hands were clenched so tightly her perfectly manicured nails dug crescents into her palms. "Well," she said through gritted teeth, her voice strained. "That was unexpected." But the admiration in the room was impossible to miss, and Natasha knew it. As the party continued and the attention gradually shifted away from Isabella's performance, a tall, impeccably dressed young man approached Natasha near the refreshment table. He had an air of confidence and wealth about him that was evident in every detail, from his tailored suit to his expensive watch to the way he carried himself. "Hi there," he said with a charming smile, extending his hand. "I'm Christopher West. You must be Natasha." Natasha's eyes widened slightly as she recognized the name. The West family was legendary in business circles, known throughout the region for their successful real estate empire and extensive investments. This was exactly the kind of opportunity she'd been dreaming about. Her entire demeanor shifted instantly, becoming sweeter, more charming. "It's wonderful to meet you, Christopher," she said, her voice like honey as she shook his hand. "I've heard so much about your family. Your father's business ventures are absolutely inspiring." Christopher smiled, clearly pleased. "I've heard quite a bit about you too, actually. Would you be interested in going out sometime? Perhaps dinner this weekend?" Natasha's heart raced. She could practically feel her classmates watching this exchange, their eyes wide with envy. This was it. This was her moment to cement her status as someone who truly belonged among the elite. "I would absolutely love to," she said with a coy smile. Across the room, Jordan stood watching with his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He'd admired Natasha for months, had done everything he could think of to get her attention, to make her see him as more than just a friend. And now she was smiling at Christopher West like he was the only person in the world. Vanessa, ever the opportunist, appeared at Natasha's elbow within seconds. "Oh my God, Natasha," she whispered excitedly, though loud enough for nearby students to hear. "This is absolutely perfect. You and Christopher would make such an incredible power couple. Everyone's going to be talking about this for weeks." Natasha's mind was already working, calculating, planning. If she could make Christopher fall for her, if she could secure a relationship with someone from a family like the Wests, it would guarantee her place among the truly elite forever. She just needed to maintain this carefully constructed image a little longer. Just a little longer, and everything she'd worked for would be within reach. She smiled to herself, feeling triumphant and invincible. But the cracks in her perfect facade were already beginning to show, and it wouldn't be long before everything came crashing down. The next day at school, Natasha couldn't help herself. She spread a new rumor through her carefully cultivated network of gossip and social climbers. "Did you see how Isabella was acting at the party?" she whispered to a group of girls between classes, making sure her voice carried just far enough. She was obviously trying to snag someone wealthy, probably targeting Marcus again. It's honestly pathetic how desperate she is. The rumor spread through Riverside Academy like wildfire through dry brush. Soon Isabella found herself the target of even more whispers, more pointed stares, more cruel comments murmured just loud enough for her to overhear. Students actively avoided her in the hallways, some sneering as she walked past, others simply turning away as if her presence alone was offensive. But Marcus wasn't having any of it. When he overheard Natasha's latest round of malicious gossip during lunch, something inside him snapped. "That's enough, Natasha," he said sharply, his voice cutting through the cafeteria chatter. Several nearby tables fell silent, students turning to watch. "You have absolutely no right to talk about Isabella like that." Natasha's face flushed red with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. "Oh, come on, Marcus. I'm just saying what literally everyone else is already thinking." "No," Marcus replied firmly, his eyes blazing. "You're spreading vicious lies because you're jealous. Isabella has more genuine character and integrity in her little finger than most people here combined, And you know it. Natasha glared at him, her jealousy burning so intensely it was almost visible. Marcus's open, public defense of Isabella only strengthened her determination to destroy the girl completely. Meanwhile, across the city at the Chun family estate, Mrs. Monroe overheard some of the staff discussing the rumors circulating about Isabella and Marcus. She knew immediately that her daughter was behind these cruel stories, and guilt gnawed at her like acid. For years, Mrs. Monroe had worked tirelessly at the Chun household, cleaning, organizing, doing whatever was needed to provide for Natasha, and give her opportunities Mrs. Monroe herself had never had. She'd even humbled herself to beg Mr. Chun to allow Natasha to attend Riverside Academy on a special arrangement. She'd wanted so desperately to give her daughter a better life. But watching Natasha use that opportunity to hurt others, to spread lies and cruelty, it broke Mrs. Monroe's heart. She sighed deeply as she went about her household duties, her heart heavy with worry and regret. She could see what her daughter was becoming, but she felt powerless to stop it. Speaking out might cost her the job that paid for Natasha's education. And then where would they be? All she could do was pray that Natasha would somehow realize the harm she was causing before it was too late. Natasha's obsession with destroying Isabella had reached a fever pitch. The jealousy consumed her thoughts day and night. Alex's growing admiration for Isabella, the attention she'd received at the party, the way students had actually applauded her. It all festered like an infected wound. She needed to do something dramatic. Something that would humiliate Isabella so completely that she'd never recover. One morning, with her phone clutched tightly in her hand, Natasha marched into the dean's office with an expression of false concern painted across her face. "Sir," she said, her voice trembling just slightly for effect, "I really think you should know that one of your students is involved in activities that could seriously harm Riverside Academy's reputation. I thought it was my duty as a concerned student to bring this to your attention immediately." The dean frowned, setting down the report he'd been reading. "What kind of activities?" Natasha held out her phone, displaying a photograph she'd carefully manipulated to look like Isabella meeting with an older, well-dressed man in what appeared to be a hotel restaurant. "I don't want to jump to conclusions," Natasha said with practiced innocence, "but I thought you should see this." The dean took the phone, examining the photo with a deepening frown. "I see. This is quite concerning. I'll address this immediately." After the lunch period, the dean called Isabella to his office. The room buzzed with confused whispers as she walked through the hallways, her head held high despite having no idea why she'd been summoned. When she entered the office, the dean's expression was stern, almost disappointed. "Isabella Chun," he began formally, his voice heavy with implied judgment, "it has come to my attention that you've been engaging in behavior that is completely unbecoming of a Riverside Academy student." He held up the manipulated photograph. "This image has been brought to me as evidence. Do you deny being in this photo?" Isabella's eyes widened as she looked at the picture more closely. Recognition flashed across her face immediately. "Sir," she began calmly, though her heart was racing, "that's my uncle. He's a member of my family. He took me to lunch last Tuesday to welcome me back home. There's absolutely nothing inappropriate about it." The dean's expression didn't soften. "And how exactly do you explain this setting? Meeting older, wealthy men in expensive restaurants and claiming they're family members? This is completely unacceptable behavior, Miss Chun." Before Isabella could respond further, before she could defend herself or demand to know who had made such accusations, the door to the office opened. The vice principal stepped in, having overheard the commotion from his adjacent office. "Excuse me, Dean Harrison," he said, his voice calm but carrying unmistakable authority. "Before this situation escalates any further, I believe there's something you need to understand." The dean turned to him, clearly annoyed at the interruption. "Vice Principal Rodriguez, I'm in the middle of a disciplinary." "Isabella Chun," Vice Principal Rodriguez continued, his tone becoming sharper, "is the daughter of Robert Chun, the largest benefactor and board member of this institution. The man in that photograph is indeed her uncle Thomas Chun, a highly respected businessman and philanthropist. I strongly suggest you verify your facts before making any more accusations against a student, based on what is clearly a manipulated situation." The room fell into stunned silence. The dean's face went pale as the implications sank in. Outside in the hallway, Natasha had been lurking near the office, trying to hear what was happening inside. The voices were too muffled for her to make out the exact words, but she knew something wasn't going right. She could feel it. Her carefully laid plan was unraveling, and panic began to claw at her chest. That evening, desperation drove Natasha to concoct an even more elaborate scheme. If she couldn't destroy Isabella's reputation at school, she would prove to everyone that she, Natasha Monroe, was the real heiress. The real person who belonged in that world of wealth and privilege. She would throw a party at one of the Chun family's properties. Her mother, Mrs. Monroe, worked as a housekeeper at one of the Chun family's smaller estates, a beautiful mansion they rarely used. Natasha convinced herself that with so many properties, they'd never even notice if she used one for a single evening. "Mom, you need to do this for me," Natasha demanded when she cornered her mother in their small apartment. "I can't let them think I'm not who I say I am. This is my chance to prove myself." Mrs. Monroe's face was filled with fear and uncertainty. "Natasha, sweetheart, this is incredibly dangerous. If Mr. Chun finds out, I could lose my job. We could lose everything we have." "I'll make sure no one finds out," Natasha insisted, her voice hardening. "They have so many houses they probably don't even remember all of them. Just one night, Mom. Please. You said you wanted to give me opportunities. Well, this is one." Mrs. Monroe felt tears prickling at her eyes, but she was too worn down, too afraid of losing her daughter's love entirely, to refuse. "Fine," she whispered. "But please, Natasha, be careful. If anything goes wrong." "Nothing will go wrong," Natasha said confidently, already imagining the impressed faces of her classmates when they saw the magnificent estate. The night of the party arrived, and Natasha had orchestrated everything perfectly. She greeted her classmates at the grand entrance of the Chun estate, dressed in an expensive gown she charged to a credit card she could barely afford, pretending the mansion was her family's home. "Welcome, everyone," she said with practiced elegance, her arms spread wide. "Come in, please. Make yourselves comfortable." Vanessa and Jordan arrived together, their eyes wide with genuine awe as they took in the marble floors, the crystal chandeliers, the priceless artwork adorning the walls. "Natasha, oh my God!" Vanessa breathed, practically speechless for once. "This place is absolutely incredible. You really are exactly who you said you were." "This is unbelievable," Jordan added, his voice filled with admiration. "You're the real deal, Natasha. The actual elite." Natasha smiled smugly, soaking in every word of praise. This was everything she'd dreamed of. Recognition, admiration, proof of her status. She led them through the mansion, pointing out expensive furniture, designer decorations, and priceless antiques, as if she'd grown up surrounded by such luxury her entire life. But as the evening progressed, cracks began to appear in her perfect facade. One of the students spotted Mrs. Monroe nervously serving drinks in the background, trying to stay as invisible as possible. "Hey," the student said, frowning slightly. "Who's that woman? She looks kind of familiar." Natasha's heart skipped a beat. "Oh, just one of the household staff. We employ quite a few people here." But another student tilted their head, studying Mrs. Monroe more carefully. "Wait a minute. Doesn't she look a lot like you, Natasha?" Before Natasha could deflect or make up another lie, Mrs. Monroe accidentally dropped a serving tray in her nervousness. The loud crash silenced the entire room. In the awkward, uncomfortable quiet that followed, someone whispered just loud enough to be heard. Is that her mother?" Natasha stammered, her carefully constructed confidence crumbling. "Of course not. Don't be ridiculous. Why would you even think?" As the evening wore on and Natasha became increasingly desperate to maintain her charade, a butler employed by the Chen family entered the main hall. His expression was one of complete confusion and growing concern. He hadn't been informed of any event, and the presence of so many teenagers in the rarely used estate was extremely irregular. He approached Natasha with professional politeness but clear suspicion. "Excuse me, miss," he said formally. "May I inquire under whose authority this gathering has been organized? I was not made aware of any scheduled events at this property." Natasha's face flushed, but she tried to maintain her haughty demeanor. "This is my family's estate, and I'm hosting this party. Your interruption is both unnecessary and extremely rude." Some of the students nearby, eager to impress Natasha and secure their place in her social circle, immediately jumped to her defense. "How dare you question Miss Monroe?" one boy said aggressively. "Know your place." "Yeah," another girl added with disdain in her voice. "You're just staff. You have no right to speak to her like that." The butler's eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of something dangerous crossing his usually impassive features. Without another word, he stepped aside and made a discreet phone call. Within the hour, everything changed. The massive front doors opened and Isabella walked in, accompanied by her father, Robert Chen. The room fell into absolute, deafening silence. Students' faces went pale as the realization of what they were witnessing began to sink in. Isn't that Isabella?" someone whispered, confusion and dawning horror in their voice. "The scholarship girl?" another person said, though their voice had lost all its earlier confidence. "Wait," a girl near the back said slowly, her eyes widening. "If this is her father's house, then she's the real. Oh my God. We've been completely wrong about everything." Whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire. "We've been deceived. Natasha lied to us. Isabella is the actual heiress." Natasha stood frozen, unable to move, unable to think, as her entire carefully constructed world collapsed around her in real time. Mr. Chan surveyed the room with a calm but unmistakably authoritative presence. His expression wasn't angry exactly, but there was a weight to his gaze that made every student in the room suddenly feel very small and very foolish. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice measured and controlled, "it appears there has been a significant misunderstanding regarding tonight's event." He let the words hang in the air, watching as comprehension dawned on face after face. Isabella's gaze found Natasha's across the crowded room. There was no triumph in her expression, no vindication or satisfaction. Instead, there was something far more complex. Disappointment mixed with genuine empathy, sadness at what Natasha had become, pity for the desperation that had driven her to such lengths. Unable to bear the weight of dozens of shocked, judgmental stares, unable to face the complete destruction of everything she'd built, Natasha fled. She ran through the mansion's elegant hallways, tears streaming down her face, her expensive heels clicking frantically against the marble floors. She could hear her mother calling after her, but she couldn't stop, couldn't turn back, couldn't face any of it. The following days at Riverside Academy were utterly unbearable for Natasha. Her fabricated wealth and manufactured status had been exposed completely. The very same classmates who had fawned over her, who had competed for her attention and approval, now avoided her like she carried some contagious disease. The whispers followed her everywhere. "Can you believe she lied about everything? I heard her mother actually works as a housekeeper for the Chan family. She pretended to be rich while bullying the actual billionaire's daughter. How pathetic is that?" The humiliation was profound and inescapable. But what cut deepest wasn't the social ostracization or the gossip. It was the realization that Isabella, the girl she had tormented so mercilessly, possessed something Natasha had always desperately wanted but could never manufacture. Genuine grace, authentic dignity, real character that didn't depend on designer labels or false pretenses. The morning after the disastrous party, Mr. Chan sat in his study at home, his expression grim as he reviewed a detailed report one of his assistants had compiled. He'd spent the previous evening learning the full extent of Natasha's bullying campaign against Isabella. His daughter had tried to downplay the situation out of kindness and a desire not to cause trouble for Mrs. Monroe. But as a father, Robert Chen could not and would not ignore the systematic cruelty that had been inflicted on his only child. "That young woman has been tormenting my Isabella for far too long," he said quietly to his assistant. "It's time she understands that actions have real consequences." He picked up his phone and dialed the school's vice principal directly. Within 24 hours, Natasha received the news that shattered what remained of her world. The scholarship that her mother had worked so hard to secure, that Mrs. Monroe had literally begged for on her knees, was being revoked immediately. With no way to afford Riverside Academy's astronomical tuition fees, Natasha was being expelled. The humiliation of walking through those halls one final time, collecting her belongings while former friends whispered and pointed, was almost more than she could bear. Her first instinct was to turn to Jordan and Vanessa, the people she'd considered her closest allies, The friends who had stood by her through everything. She called them repeatedly, sent desperate text messages, left voicemails that went unanswered. Finally, she spotted them at their usual cafe near campus, sitting at an outdoor table as if nothing had changed. Jordan! Vanessa! Natasha called out, rushing toward their table with a mixture of hope and desperation in her voice. Jordan glanced up at her, his face transforming into an expression of cold disdain she'd never seen directed at her before. "What do you want, Natasha?" he asked, his voice flat and emotionless. I need your help," she stammered, suddenly feeling very small. "You're my friends. I thought maybe." Vanessa actually laughed, a sharp, cruel sound that cut like glass. "Friends? Friends with you? I'm sorry, Natasha, but we don't associate with people like you. We don't associate with liars." "Exactly," Jordan nodded. His earlier admiration completely vanished. "You lied to everyone, Natasha. You embarrassed us by dragging us into your pathetic fantasy world. We're done. Completely done." Tears filled Natasha's eyes as she watched them stand up and walk away without so much as a backward glance. The same people who had praised her, who had competed for her attention just days ago, now couldn't get away from her fast enough. "This is all Isabella's fault," Natasha whispered bitterly to herself as she stood alone on the sidewalk. "Why does she get to be born into wealth and privilege while I have nothing? It's not fair. None of this is fair." Later that afternoon, Natasha was sitting alone on a bench in the park near her apartment building, her mind churning with thoughts of revenge and despair and hopelessness, when someone sat down beside her. She looked up to see Christopher, or rather, the young man who had introduced himself as Christopher West at Jordan's party. "Natasha," he began quietly, his confident demeanor replaced with visible hesitation and guilt. "I need to tell you something. Something I should have said before." She looked at him warily, her eyes red from crying. "What is it? Have you come here to mock me too? To laugh at the poor girl who dared to dream above her station?" He sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair in an anxious gesture. "No. Actually, I lied to you. My name isn't Christopher West. It's just Chris. Christopher Miller, actually. I'm not from a wealthy family. I wanted to impress you because I thought you were this sophisticated elite person, and I figured I needed to match that image to have any chance with you." Natasha's eyes widened in shock and then narrowed with disgust. "You're not rich. You're just some nobody." "I know I shouldn't have lied," Chris continued earnestly. "But now that the truth is out for both of us, maybe this could actually be a good thing? Maybe we can start fresh, be honest with each other? I genuinely care about you, Natasha. I have since I first saw you. Can we give this a real chance?" Natasha's face twisted with revulsion and anger. She stood up abruptly, looking down at him with barely contained fury. "Are you completely serious right now? Do you actually think I would associate myself with poverty? With someone like you?" Her voice dripped with venom. "I'm going to marry a very wealthy man, Chris or Christopher or whoever you are. I'm not staying at the bottom with people like you. I refuse." Chris's shoulders slumped as she stormed away, leaving him heartbroken on the park bench, staring after her with sad, disappointed eyes. Desperation and rage consumed Natasha completely in the days that followed. She couldn't bear the thought of Isabella, the girl who had ruined her carefully constructed life, continuing to thrive while Natasha herself suffered in obscurity and shame. The need for revenge became more than just a desire. It became an obsession that ate away at her constantly. Eventually, a sinister plan began forming in her mind. If she couldn't rise above Isabella, if she couldn't reclaim her position through social manipulation, then she would drag Isabella down into the darkness with her. She would kidnap her, using Chris's lingering feelings for her, feelings she recognized and was willing to ruthlessly exploit. Natasha reached out to him one evening with a carefully crafted message. "I need your help with something important," she said when they met, her voice sweet and manipulative in exactly the way she knew would work on him. "You're the only person I can actually trust anymore." Chris looked at her cautiously, hope and doubt warring in his expression. "What do you need, Natasha?" "I just want to teach Isabella a lesson," Natasha replied, trying to sound casual, almost playful. "She's the reason my entire life fell apart. She has to understand what it feels like to be powerless, to be humiliated. Will you help me?" Chris hesitated. Every instinct he had was screaming that this was wrong, that he should refuse, that he should walk away immediately. But his feelings for Natasha, misguided as they were, clouded his judgment completely. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" he finally said. Natasha's smile was cold and calculated. "Just help me grab her for a few hours. We'll scare her, humiliate her, make her beg. That's all. Nothing permanent. Nothing that will actually hurt her. Just justice. Payback for what she did to me." Against every better instinct, against the small voice in his head telling him this would end badly, Chris agreed. The opportunity came during one of Isabella's late evening study sessions at the library. As she walked home alone along a quiet street, her backpack slung over one shoulder and her mind on an upcoming exam, Chris approached her with a friendly smile. "Excuse me," he said politely. "I'm a bit lost. Could you help me with directions?" Isabella, always willing to help someone in need, stopped and turned toward him. "Of course, where are you trying to?" Before she could finish the sentence, Chris covered her mouth with a cloth and lifted her quickly into a waiting car where Natasha sat in the back seat, her expression twisted with vindictive satisfaction. They drove to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a place Natasha had scouted earlier specifically because of its isolation. Isabella was tied to a chair in the center of the empty, echoing space. Her eyes were wide but surprisingly calm, her mind already working to assess the situation and find a way out. Natasha paced back and forth in front of her like a predator circling wounded prey, her expression filled with barely contained rage. "You think you're so much better than me, don't you?" Natasha hissed, her voice shaking with emotion. "With your perfect life and your billionaire father and everyone admiring you. Let's see how perfect you look now." Isabella didn't respond immediately, her calm demeanor only making Natasha angrier. "You won't get away with this," Isabella finally said, her voice remarkably steady given the circumstances. "My father will find me. He has resources you can't even imagine. And when he does, you'll regret this more than anything you've ever done." Natasha smirked, but there was something desperate and unhinged in the expression. "Not before I completely ruin you." She turned to Chris, her voice sharp and commanding. "Do it. Show her what it feels like to have nothing, to be nothing." Chris's face went pale. "What are you talking about, Natasha?" "You know exactly what I mean," Natasha snapped, her eyes wild. "Ruin her. Take away her dignity. Make her beg for mercy." Chris backed away immediately, shaking his head with growing horror. "No, absolutely not, Natasha. This has gone way too far already. We agreed to scare her, that's all. Her father is one of the most powerful men in the city. He'll destroy both of us if we actually hurt her." Natasha's face contorted with fury. "You're pathetic. You're a coward. You said you'd help me. I agreed to help you teach her a lesson, not to do whatever you're suggesting." Chris's voice was rising with panic and disgust. "I won't do it. I can't. This is insane, Natasha. We need to let her go right now before this gets even worse." For a moment, the warehouse was silent except for the sound of Natasha's heavy, angry breathing. "Fine," she finally spat. "Fine. I should have known you'd be useless. But I have a backup plan. I always have a backup plan." Hours passed with no sign of Isabella at home. Mr. Chun, a man who had built an empire through careful planning and decisive action, wasted absolutely no time organizing a massive search operation. He offered a substantial reward for any information leading to his daughter's whereabouts. The news spread through the city like wildfire, and soon hundreds of people were involved in the search. Meanwhile, at the warehouse, Natasha's carefully laid plans were unraveling faster than she could manage. The tension in the room was suffocating as Natasha paced frantically, barking orders at Chris, who stood frozen with guilt and fear. "This isn't over," Natasha said, her voice high and desperate. "We just need to." The warehouse door suddenly burst open with a deafening crash. Marcus stood in the entrance, flanked by two professional security guards hired by Mr. Chun. His face was a mixture of fury and determination, his usual easygoing demeanor completely replaced by protective rage. "Natasha, step away from her," Marcus ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Step away right now." Natasha froze, her phone still clutched in one trembling hand. "What are you doing here?" This has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with me, Marcus said, striding toward Isabella with purpose. You've crossed a line that can never be uncrossed, Natasha. This ends now. Chris, overwhelmed by guilt and relief that someone had finally stopped this nightmare, raised his hands in surrender. I didn't want to do this, he said quickly, his voice breaking. I was just helping her because I don't know what I thought. This was a terrible mistake. You're both pathetic, Marcus said sharply, moving to untie Isabella with gentle, careful hands. And you'll both face serious consequences for what you've done. Natasha, realizing she was completely out of options and that her plan had failed catastrophically, lunged toward Isabella in one final desperate attempt to maintain some sense of control. But Marcus was faster. He caught Natasha's arm and pulled her back firmly, his grip unbreakable. Let her go, Natasha, he said sternly, his eyes blazing. It's over. Natasha's composure finally completely cracked. She screamed in frustration and anguish, tears streaming down her face, her entire body shaking. She has everything, she sobbed. She's perfect and rich and everyone loves her. I couldn't stand it. I couldn't stand watching her have everything I'll never have. Isabella, now freed from her restraints, stood slowly. She looked at Natasha with an expression that was complex and difficult to read. A mixture of pity, sadness, and something that might have been understanding. You could have had real friends, Natasha, Isabella said quietly. You didn't have to do any of this. You could have just been yourself. Natasha slumped to the floor, her strength and resolve completely gone. She looked small, broken, nothing like the confident, commanding person she pretended to be for so long. I hated you, she admitted in a whisper, because you reminded me of everything I'll never be, everything I can never have. The police arrived shortly after, alerted by Marcus's earlier call. As officers entered the warehouse, Natasha and Chris were both arrested on the spot. As they were led away in handcuffs, their hands secured behind their backs, Natasha looked back at Isabella one final time. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sounds of police radios and official procedures. I'm so sorry. For everything. Isabella didn't respond with words, but she met Natasha's gaze with calm understanding. Despite all the pain Natasha had caused, despite the cruelty and the lies and now this terrifying ordeal, Isabella recognized that Natasha's hatred had stemmed from deep insecurity, from profound sadness, from a desperate desire to be something she wasn't. Tell me in the comments. Have you ever felt pressured to be someone you're not just to fit in? And if you've dealt with bullying or betrayal, share your story if you're comfortable. You're not alone in this. Subscribe for more stories about standing your ground, finding your strength and reclaiming your life. Your story matters and I want to hear it. Later that evening, after giving statements to the police and being checked by a doctor to ensure she was physically unharmed, Isabella rested at home in her own room. Marcus stopped by to check on her, his face still etched with concern. Are you okay? He asked gently, sitting in the chair near her bed. Really okay, I mean. That was terrifying. Isabella nodded slowly, offering him a small but genuine smile. I'm all right. Thanks to you. If you hadn't figured out where I was, I couldn't let anything happen to you, Marcus said, his voice soft but intense. You mean too much to all of us, to the school, to your friends. Isabella looked at him thoughtfully. You know, through all of this, the bullying, the rumors, the kidnapping, I learned something important. It's not about what other people think of you or what status they believe you have. It's about knowing who you are and having people around you who see your true value. Marcus smiled warmly. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met, Isabella. Most people would have broken under that kind of pressure, that level of cruelty. But you never let it change who you are. I had good support, Isabella said, meeting his eyes. People like you who stood by me when it would have been easier to just go along with the crowd. In the weeks that followed, Natasha faced the full weight of consequences for her actions. Expelled from school, criminally charged with kidnapping, and carrying a record that would follow her for years, she was left to confront the ruins of the life she tried so desperately to build on lies. The classmates who had once admired her fabricated persona now wanted nothing to do with her. Her name became synonymous with deception and cruelty at Riverside Academy. As Natasha sat alone in the small bedroom of her mother's modest apartment, she was forced to reflect on her choices for the first time without the distraction of maintaining false appearances. The jealousy and bitterness that had consumed her for so long had led to nothing but pain, for herself and for others. The desperate need to appear wealthy and important had destroyed any chance she might have had at genuine friendship or real happiness. For the first time in her life, she began to understand the true cost of her hatred and her lies. Mrs. Monroe, heartbroken but still loving her daughter, sat with her one evening. "You have to rebuild, Natasha," she said gently, taking her daughter's hand. "Not the fake life you tried to create, but a real one. Based on truth this time. It won't be easy and it won't be glamorous, but it can be genuine. It can be yours." Natasha nodded, tears flowing freely down her cheeks. She had a long, difficult road ahead of her. But maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to become someone she didn't have to lie about being. Meanwhile, at Riverside Academy, Isabella and Marcus grew even closer. Their shared experiences, the trials they'd endured together, had forged a bond built on trust, mutual respect, and genuine affection. One sunny afternoon, as they walked through the school gardens after class, Marcus turned to Isabella with a soft smile. "You know something, Isabella? You've taught me so much about what really matters. It's not about wealth or status or what family you come from. It's about the person you choose to be when things get difficult. The character you show when no one's watching." Isabella smiled back at him, feeling warmth spread through her chest. "And you showed me that there are people who will stand by you no matter how tough things get. People who see your true value, not just the surface. Thank you for that, Marcus. For always being there." They continued walking, comfortable in the silence between them, both knowing that what they shared was the beginning of something special. As the school year progressed, Isabella became known not as the billionaire's daughter or the girl who was bullied, but simply as herself. Someone with genuine kindness, unshakable integrity, and quiet strength that inspired others. She tutored students who struggled academically, volunteered for charity initiatives, and treated everyone, regardless of their background, with the same respect and dignity. Marcus stood by her side through it all, and though neither of them had put a label on their relationship, everyone could see the deep connection they shared. Whether it was friendship or something more, it didn't really matter. What mattered was that they had each other, and that their bond was built on something real and lasting. On a cool evening several months later, Isabella stood on the balcony of her family's home, looking out over the city lights below. Her father joined her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I'm proud of you, you know," Mr. Chun said quietly. "Not because of your grades or your achievements, though those are impressive. I'm proud of how you handled everything with grace and dignity. How you never let cruelty change who you are at your core." Isabella leaned against her father, feeling safe and loved. "You taught me that, Dad. You always said character matters more than anything else. I just tried to remember that when things got hard." "You did more than remember it," he said with a smile. "You lived it. And that's made all the difference." As Isabella looked out at the city where she'd endured so much pain but also found genuine friendship and discovered her own strength, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: peace. She'd stood her ground, stayed true to herself, and come through the darkness into light. And that, she realized, was worth more than all the wealth in the world. If this story touched you in any way, if you've ever felt judged or misunderstood or bullied for who you are, I want you to know something. Your true worth has nothing to do with what others think. It has everything to do with who you choose to be when things get hard. Subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength, standing firm in your truth, and never letting anyone else define your value. You're stronger than you know, and you're not alone in this journey. Thank you for listening to my story, and please share yours in the comments. I want to hear from you.